You cannot do business with the
Well,
Russians.
they've done it for decades, though. This is not anything
right.
that started with 2016.
And that was, in fact, the substance of the famous Clapper report that was released by the Director of National Intelligence in January about whether there was any meddling that had affected the Trump campaign or the Clinton campaign. The substance of that paper was about Russian meddling in the politics of the West and in the politics of the United States to undermine and destabilize us. It was not explicitly about contacts with Trump officials.
In the meantime, the president has hired an outside attorney, Mark Kasowitz, to try to, corral the cats, I guess, and get the White House's response to this investigation. Is that going to allow other White House personnel to get the president's agenda moving?
I think it's a very good idea. I mean, this White House has been running on basically two tracks, the Trump-Russia track and the Trump agenda track. And it's only the Trump agenda track that's going to lead to any kind of wins or victories or towards a successful presidency. The Trump-Russia track, it was basically a train wreck. And the idea that they are now going to sequester the Russia inquiries with the office of Mark Kasowitz and the attorneys that he undoubtedly is going to hire, I think is a very good idea. Look, if Justice has appointed a special prosecutor to look into it inside the FBI, there's no reason why the White House shouldn't sequester Russia in its own office. And if the press wants to ask them questions, they should go to those lawyers and let the rest of the Trump White House get on with the business for which they were elected.
Dan Henniger from the Wall Street Journal. Dan, thanks very much.
Good to be with you, John.
Heather.
Well, the U.S. Navy on the move with 2 aircraft carriers involved in joint exercises on the high seas. But the drills are also intended to send a stark message to one rogue regime. And you have to see this. New details on one of the worst terror attacks on American soil. Some new video emerging from the viewpoint of police officers as they responded to this horrific scene.
A Fox News alert and newly released footage gives a different perspective on the horrors of the Pulse nightclub shooting. Body cam video from the viewpoint of police officers on the scene. The attacker killed 49 people on June 12th of last year, making this the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history. Steve Harrigan live in Miami with more on that. Steve?
John, more than 10 hours of video footage from this horrific night has been released from 30 different police body cams, and you really get an up-close feeling of that night. The horror, the terror, the adrenaline, the fear. Police really running immediately towards the scene. Within 2 minutes, the first responders were there, entering at times through shot-out windows into a darkened nightclub where the dead and wounded lay all around by the dozens, and confronting a killer with an armed assault rifle, they immediately returned fire. You also hear some personal moments as well. One police officer whispering to himself before going into the fight, asking Jesus to watch over him. There has been some questions, some criticism of police tactics from that night 1 year ago, why it took 3 hours from the time the first shots were fired to make a breach and finally kill that gunman. There were some complications to the entire operation, though. Hostages were being held in a back bathroom. The killer, too, had threatened that he had a suicide vest on. He could explode at any minute. But you get a sense of the uncertainty in that dark, deadly arena that night. Police were saving people at the same time frisking people that they were saving, perhaps afraid that the killer had accomplices inside that nightclub. John, back to you.
And for all the criticism that our police officers take, most of us would not want to do those jobs. Steve Harrigan. Steve, thank you.
You'd be running the other way.
Yep.
Hats off to them. Well, right now, 2 symbols of American power are cruising off the coast of the Korean Peninsula, running drills amid growing tension with the North. The aircraft carriers Carl Vinson and Ronald Reagan and their support groups are taking part in a 3-day drill alongside Japanese forces. The Pentagon dispatching the ships to the area after a series of North Korea ballistic missile tests. You know about those, and the ongoing hostile language. Right now, the training is happening in the Sea of Japan between the Korean Peninsula and Japan.
Well, Republicans claimed victory when their plan to replace Obamacare passed the House of Representatives. Now it moves on to the Senate, where, according to one influential senator, it could be up for a vote midsummer. A little too ambitious? Our panel debates. Plus, a driver getting to safety just moments before his fuel tanker is engulfed in flames. We'll tell you more about this scene that witnesses are calling nothing short of amazing.
So I looked out the window and I saw the truck stopping, and I saw fire streaks behind it, like on Back to the Future.
Right now, we're getting cell phone video that captures the terrifying moments after a fuel tanker explodes on a highway near Denver. Fire crews battling the massive flames for nearly 3 hours, while nearby witnesses were simply amazed at what they saw.
The first boom, things flew, and then the rest of the booms, I didn't see anything fly.
Heard like a really, really big boom. Looked up, saw black billowing smoke.
I've never seen anything like this before. The fire is just, we could get up close enough to it, actually feel the warmth of it.
The driver escaping the cab just moments before the tanker was completely engulfed, his pants leg on fire as he got away. Emergency crews rushed him to a nearby hospital for treatment.
Well, some new details on a potential timeline to repeal and replace Obamacare. The Republican plan passed the House, and now it moves to the Senate. And Texas Senator John Cornyn keeping it short and sweet when he was asked if Republicans can actually get it done by the end of the year.
Oh, absolutely. We'll get it done by the end of July at the latest.
Did you hear that? Yeah, he said end of July. So let's bring in Adam Goodman, a Republican campaign strategist and Edward R. Murrow Fellow at Tufts University, and Jim Kessler, former legislative and policy director to Charles Schumer and co-founder of Third Way. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
So I'll start with the obvious question. I'll begin with you, Adam. Is this wishful thinking on the part of Cornyn that he can get this done in, the next 2 months?
Well, Senator Cornyn's prediction may prove optimistic, but it's commendable because he wants to get something done, because, as Ed Harris would probably love to hear, Houston, we do have a problem. When you see that our premiums are now up to $5,712 for the average individual a year. That's a 105% increase in 4 years. Wages have been stagnant. We have primary doctor shortages, and insurers are fleeing the market. So we've got to do something. But if you might say the verdict on the Affordable Care Act, if you were asked, well, how's it going? You'd have to say, are you getting more? No. Are we paying more? Absolutely. And I think that's what all of us have to put our minds and efforts into, regardless of when this is passed, though I do think I commend Senator Cornyn for a sense of urgency.
Or at least being positive about it, trying to move it along, which is what the president wants to happen. And there are still plenty of ideological differences within the Republican Party themselves. So, Jim, what do you think? Is this being just way too optimistic?
I think July 2018 is way too optimistic. I don't think this ever gets to the Senate floor. You've got a Senate GOP that is bitterly divided on health care, on major policy items. You have a president who right now is weak and mired in scandal, and I don't think that's going to change. And then the House-passed bill is very unpopular. So, weak president, divided party, unpopular bill. If you're cooking up a recipe for failure, those are the three main ingredients, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
So, Adam, do you see senators making any of the same mistakes that House Republicans did? I know that there's been some discussion about the public meetings or people being allowed to know enough information about this before it moves forward.
To be honest, I'm concerned about it because, Communications 101 suggests you onboard the public first. Tell them again what the problem is. Get them involved in the discussion. I like hearing that the senators are meeting now a lot to talk through, some of the options, but I think the public shouldn't be listening to that on the outside of a closed door. They have to be a part of it. And then, hopefully, when this is all said and done, guys, I hope the final thing we hear from people in Washington are words you never hear, which are these. Once this is done, and once we have true reform on health care, once we get there, if something isn't quite working the way it was intended to work, we'll fix that. We won't shove it down into a black hole. We won't kick the can down the road. We'll actually say it did not work out quite the way we wanted it to. We'll go at it again. Wouldn't that be refreshing for a change?
So, Jim, what do you think the chances are of that happening?
I think the chances of something happening positive on this is possible, maybe in 2 years' time, when Republicans give up the ghost of repealing this law. You know, the House passed bill, 23 million people would lose insurance, but if you look at page 41 of the Congressional Budget Office, the nonpartisan review of the bill, a 64-year-old working class person would go from paying $1,700 under Obamacare to $16,000 under Trump care.
But that's in a state with no waivers, though. I mean, you have to add that into there.
With the waivers, it would be $13,600. So, you know, it's more than $10,000 for that person. This is a tough thing to sell. The Republicans have oversold this for a long time. I think they're in trouble. Eventually, I think there's fixes that need to be done, but they're Jiffy Lube size fixes, not the overhaul of, you know, junk the car and overhaul the engine.
Do you think they do need to just overhaul the entire engine? The Senate does, or do you think that they can come together quickly on a plan that uses part of what the House put together, but then some of their own changes as well? Adam?
Well, yeah, this is fortunately, this is where the legislative process should really help. This is where you drill down into real specifics to make sure the program, which in concept I think a lot of people are behind, actually will in reality work. And what I'd like to suggest to Democrats who have made it very clear, not to make it partisan, but they've made it very clear they don't want to be a part of this process. They basically say this is your problem. Well, health care is everyone's problem and everyone's concern, and we want them to come to the table and not just say, you know, this isn't what we would back or support or be comfortable with, because the very problems that we're facing right now were ones created not so long ago in a Democratic administration.
Well, Democrats have definitely united against this push for repeal and replace. The problem is whether or not Republicans can unite moving forward. Adam, Jim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're about an hour and a half away from President Donald Trump's big announcement from the White House Rose Garden. He will reveal his decision on whether to pull the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accord. We'll take a closer look at two perspectives on that deal and its impact. Yesterday's terror in Kabul's Green Zone is a clear sign that terrorists can strike when and where they want. Will this force President Trump's hand to try to send more troops to Afghanistan? Why, our next guest says this needs to happen to win what he calls the unwinnable war.
I think it's fair to say 28 of the 28 nations sitting around a table all were committed to an enduring presence in Afghanistan and continue to support particularly President Ghani's articulated plan for security.
A Fox News alert, we are awaiting President Trump's decision on the Paris Climate Accord. He's expected to announce the U.S. will withdraw from the nearly 200-nation pledge to reduce pollution worldwide. The White House insists it will cost U.S. jobs, but we will find out for sure in about 90 minutes. The president, as you know, can surprise us. Doug McElway has more from our Washington bureau. Doug?
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth, John. There's always the chance the president will surprise us. It has been said that when faced with a difficult decision like this, the last piece of advice he hears is often the one that he bases his decision on, so we'll see. But that said, the expectation is he will announce his decision to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord this afternoon, believing that the agreement hamstrings the economy. Experts over this are deeply divided.
The Paris Climate Accord is bad for a couple of reasons. One, it will have no impact on climate itself. And the temperature impact might moderate by at most a couple of tenths of a degree if everybody plays along. The argument that we're going to make money because of all the technological innovation is almost laughable.
1,000 private businesses have urged Mr. Trump to stay in. It is the General Motors, it's the Dows, it's the lifeblood of the American economy, it's the Walmarts, the 3Ms. So they are all pretty unanimous that it'd be better to stay in.
Trump's expected decision is likely to worsen the deep political divisions racking our country. Democratic governors and big city Democratic mayors, in anticipation of today's decision, had already been laying the groundwork for a revolt, as many as 12 of them vowing to abide by the Paris Accord anyway.
Donald Trump, by being a denier, by going against science, is actually stimulating a reaction. And that reaction is going to be strong, and it's going to be sustainable, and California is going to be right there in the forefront of leading the effort to decarbonize our economy.
This may set up a true test of what the founders called the laboratory of the states. If Democratic governors do indeed team up, as they promised, we may have two different energy standards governing the states. So we're talking not just red against blue states, but fossil states against renewable states. Over time, the best economies